The mysterious passenger. It was a quiet summer night in the deserts of Arizona. Sarah had been driving for hours along the empty highway, feeling increasingly exhausted and tense. She was returning from a long visit with her family and was eager to get home and rest. The road ahead stretched endlessly, surrounded by darkness so profound that it felt like she was the only person left in the world. The radio in her car emitted faint static sounds, unable to pick up any channels in this remote area. Her headlights illuminated the road ahead, revealing nothing but patches of dry grass and lonely cacti on either side. The eerie silence made Sarah feel as if something was lurking just beyond the reach of her headlights, hidden in the vast darkness. Suddenly, a cold shiver ran down her spine. She glanced at the rearview mirror and her heart nearly stopped. On the back seat sat a woman, silent and still, her head bowed low. Long, black hair covered her face, and she wore a black coat that shimmered faintly in the dim interior light, as if she had been sitting there for hours without Sarah noticing. Sarah froze, unable to believe what she saw. For a moment, she told herself it was just fatigue playing tricks on her. But when she turned her head to look directly at the back seat, it was empty. The woman had vanished. Sarah exhaled, but her hands on the steering wheel trembled. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest, and her throat was dry. "It's just exhaustion," she whispered, though the lingering coldness clung to her skin. A few minutes later, a strange sound caught her attention, a soft whisper, almost too faint to hear. It was the sound of breathing coming from right behind her. Sarah fought the urge to check the mirror again, but the growing unease gnawed at her. Finally, she gave in and stole a glance at the mirror. This time, the woman was there again, only now she had raised her face. Her pale, ghostly white complexion was framed by her tangled black hair, and her eyes, deep, empty voids, stared directly at Sarah. The woman's lips moved, mumbling words Sarah couldn't make out, as if she were whispering to herself. Sarah screamed, yanking the steering wheel in panic. The car swerved violently, skidding off the lane and grinding against the gravel on the side of the road. She struggled to regain control, her heart racing wildly. With a sharp turn, she managed to steer the car back onto the highway, her whole body drenched in cold sweat. She dared not look in the mirror again, but the feeling of not being alone lingered. All Sarah could think of now was finding a safe place to stop. But the road seemed endless, with no sign of rest areas or gas stations. She pressed harder on the gas pedal, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Yet the whispering continued soft and persistent, just behind her ear. At times, she felt cold breaths caress the back of her neck, sending chills down her spine. Finally, Sarah spotted faint lights in the distance, a rest stop. She turned off the highway, tires screeching as they hit the gravel parking lot. The small rest area was deserted, with only a few trucks parked under dim, flickering lights. Sarah slammed the brakes and turned off the engine. Silence engulfed the car once more. She sat motionless, catching her breath, heart pounding against her ribcage. There were no more whispers. Everything was eerily quiet. With trembling hands, she slowly turned her head to check the back seat one last time. It was empty. Sarah let out a shaky sigh, clutching the steering wheel tightly. "It was just my imagination," she whispered, though deep down, she wasn't sure she believed it. She opened the car door, hoping the cool night air would help calm her nerves. Stepping outside, she took in the stillness of the desert. The breeze was cold, and the distant sound of the wind rushing against the cacti was the only thing she could hear. After a few moments, she felt steady enough to continue her drive. She climbed back into the driver's seat, then froze. Her blood ran cold as her eyes locked onto something on the windshield from the inside. There, pressed against the glass, was a wet handprint, as if someone had just placed their hand on it. Sarah stared in disbelief. The handprint was fresh, with droplets of water trailing down the glass. But the inside of the car was dry. Before she could make sense of it, the car's headlights flickered on by themselves, casting a dim beam of light onto the deserted parking lot. And there, standing just a few feet away, was the woman in the black coat. Her hollow eyes locked onto Sarah's, and a twisted, unnatural smile curled across her lips. The air around Sarah grew colder, and she felt an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. Terrified, Sarah slammed the door shut, locked it, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and she floored the gas pedal, speeding out of the rest stop as fast as she could. She didn't dare look back. She didn't dare check the rearview mirror again. But no matter how fast she drove, the suffocating sense of not being alone stayed with her. Then, faint but unmistakable, the whispering returned, as if the woman were sitting right behind her once more, breathing softly into her ear. "I never left." From that night on, Sarah could never drive at night without feeling the cold presence lingering in the back seat. And every now and then, just at the edge of her vision, she could swear she saw a figure in black, patiently waiting for the right moment to reappear. The chair in the storage room. Tom was a seasoned night guard at a large shopping mall in Chicago. After years working the graveyard shift, he thought he'd seen it all: suspicious trespassers, malfunctioning alarms, and even the occasional eerie silence that clings to empty hallways late at night. But nothing unsettled him quite like the old, abandoned storage room in the basement. The room was mostly empty, save for a few rusted shelves and a solitary old leather chair placed in the middle of the room. The chair was large, cracked at the seams, and smelled faintly of mildew. It looked out of place, as though someone had put it there and forgotten about it. What made Tom and every other guard uneasy was the way the chair always returned to the same exact spot in the center of the room, no matter how many times it was moved. Whenever someone pushed it to the corner or leaned it against the wall, it would somehow be back in the middle of the room by the next shift. No one admitted to moving it, and eventually, the other guards stopped trying altogether. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the chair was waiting for what? He didn't know, but the thought haunted him every time he entered that cold, dimly lit room. One rainy night, as the wind howled outside and thunder rumbled in the distance, Tom found himself alone on duty. He had gone through most of his rounds uneventfully until it was time to check the basement storage room. With a heavy sigh, he pulled out the keys and descended the creaky staircase. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting flickering shadows on the concrete walls. When Tom opened the storage room door, The chair was there right in the middle, as always, facing the door. It almost seemed to be waiting for him. For a moment, he stood frozen in the doorway, a chill running down his spine. The storm outside made the walls groan, and he could hear the faint patter of rain leaking through the old pipes above. But inside the room, everything was deathly quiet. Something inside Tom snapped that night. He was tired of feeling intimidated by an old piece of furniture. It was just a chair, a damn chair. Determined to prove to himself that it was nothing more, he stepped into the room, closed the door behind him, and approached the chair. He reached out, gripping the cold leather, and with an act of defiance, he pushed the chair violently toward the far wall. It scraped against the floor with a loud screech, but Tom didn't stop until it was pressed flush against the corner. "Let's see you move now," he muttered under his breath. But as soon as he turned around, the overhead lights blinked out, plunging the room into complete darkness. Tom's heart raced. He fumbled for his flashlight, his hands shaking uncontrollably, but the moment he clicked it on, the beam flickered and dimmed. Something was wrong. The air in the room felt heavier, as if the walls were closing in, and a strange noise began to emerge, a slow, deliberate creaking, like wood bending under pressure. And then it happened. From the far corner of the room, the unmistakable sound of something shifting echoed through the darkness. Tom froze. The chair was moving on its own. His flashlight flickered again, and for a brief second, the weak beam illuminated the chair, now halfway across the room, dragging itself slowly but deliberately toward its original spot in the center. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He stepped back, his pulse thundering in his ears. The chair stopped moving, as if sensing his presence. It was now just a few feet away from him, its seat facing him like an invitation. But Tom could feel something more, a presence that wasn't just attached to the chair. Something old and malevolent lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. The air grew colder, and Tom felt a faint breath graze the back of his neck. He spun around, but saw nothing. And then softly, barely audible, he heard the sound of a chair creaking, as if someone invisible had just sat down. Tom backed away toward the door, every instinct in his body screaming at him to leave. But when he reached for the handle, the door wouldn't budge. The knob twisted uselessly in his hand, as though it had been locked from the other side. Behind him, the chair began to rock. The rhythmic sound of the leather creaking filled the room, growing louder with each sway. Tom squeezed his eyes shut, trying to convince himself this wasn't real, but the sound wouldn't stop. And then he heard a voice. It was low and raspy, whispering words he couldn't understand. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, curling around him like a serpent. His flashlight flickered one last time, and in that brief moment of light, he saw it, a shadowy figure slumped in the chair, rocking slowly back and forth. Its face was obscured, but Tom knew with every fiber of his being that it was staring directly at him. The lights went out completely, and Tom felt something brush against his shoulder, a cold, clammy hand. He stumbled backward, frantically yanking at the door. And just as he felt the presence behind him lean closer, the door swung open with a violent screech. Tom burst into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind him. He stood there, gasping for breath, his heart pounding as if it would explode. For a moment, he thought he was safe. But then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The handle of the door was covered in wet fingerprints, large, smudged prints, as if multiple hands had tried to pull the door open from the other side. Tom never went back to the basement storage room again. He told his manager the door was jammed and refused to go near it, no matter what anyone said. Other guards reported hearing strange noises from the room at night, whispers, footsteps, the sound of a chair scraping across the floor, but no one dared investigate. And the chair, it remained in the storage room, always in the same spot, waiting patiently in the center of the room. No one moved it again, and every guard who passed by the door swore they could feel it something behind that door, watching, waiting for the next person foolish enough to sit down. Because once you sit in that chair, you never truly leave. The shadow in the photo. Kevin was a freelance photographer with a passion for exploring abandoned and eerie places. This time, he decided to travel to a remote town in Maine, famous for its haunting tales of deep forests and derelict houses. For Kevin, it was the perfect opportunity to create unique photographs that would capture the eerie beauty of isolation. He arrived in the town on a chilly autumn afternoon. The sky was overcast, and a thick mist rolled through the narrow streets. The silence was unsettling, but it also stirred his curiosity. Kevin ventured deep into the forest, snapping pictures of gnarled tree trunks, fallen leaves, and an old, decaying cabin hidden within the fog. After hours of exploration, Kevin sat on a rock to review the photos he had taken. As he scrolled through the images, a shiver ran down his spine. In almost every picture, a shadowy figure appeared in the background, standing between the trees. The figure wore a long, dark coat and seemed to be staring directly at the camera. Kevin was sure he had been alone the entire time. The sight of the figure sent a wave of unease through him, but he tried to rationalize it. Maybe it's just a glitch or some trick of the mist, he whispered to himself, but the feeling of being watched lingered. That night, Kevin lay in his bed at a small inn near the forest. He tried to sleep, but the memory of the figure gnawed at him. His camera sat on the desk, and in the room's darkness, it felt like an unblinking eye, silently observing him. The ticking clock on the wall echoed through the quiet room, each second dragging on. Unable to shake his growing anxiety, Kevin sat up, turned on the light, and decided to review the photos again, hoping to put his mind at ease. But as he flipped through the images, his heart sank. The shadowy figure wasn't just there, it had moved closer in each photo. At first, the figure was hidden behind the trees, watching from a distance. But with every photo, it had crept nearer, until it was standing just a few feet away from the camera. The last photo sent a chill down his spine. The figure was now directly in front of the lens, its face hidden in darkness, as if intentionally concealing its identity. Kevin's hands trembled as he placed the camera back on the desk. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. But just then, the camera made a faint click on its own. The screen flickered, and a new photo appeared: Kevin lying in bed, photographed from a dark corner of the room. His blood ran cold. Someone or something had taken that photo while he slept. Kevin's breath quickened. He frantically scanned the room, but no one was there. The door was still shut, and the room was eerily silent. Click. The camera took another photo. On the screen appeared an image of Kevin sitting upright on the bed, eyes wide with terror captured in real time. But who was holding the camera? As his heart raced, Kevin reached for the camera, intending to turn it off. But just as his hand touched it, the final image appeared on the screen. In the photo, the dark figure was now standing right behind him, close enough to touch. Kevin spun around, but the room was empty. Yet, he could feel a cold breath brush against the back of his neck, and in the silence, a faint sigh drifted through the air. Kevin stuffed his belongings into his bag and bolted from the inn. He didn't bother checking out, he just wanted to leave. His car roared to life as he sped down the dark, empty road. But no matter how far he drove, the gnawing sensation of being watched refused to fade. After an hour of driving, Kevin's breathing began to steady, and he tried to convince himself that it had all been his imagination. But then, glancing into the rearview mirror, his heart stopped. The shadowy figure in the dark coat was sitting in the back seat, staring directly at him. Before Kevin could react, the figure leaned closer, and a whisper cold and deliberate echoed in his ear. "I found you." The last guest. John was a long-haul truck driver, used to spending lonely nights on empty highways. One night, as he was driving through the Nevada desert, exhaustion began to take its toll. The road ahead stretched into pitch-black darkness with no sign of life in sight. A light drizzle started falling, and the mist on the horizon made it even harder to see. For hours, he hadn't passed a single car, and the eerie silence weighed heavily on his mind. Just when he thought he couldn't keep driving any longer, a flickering neon sign appeared in the distance. Desert Rest. The motel looked old and abandoned, with dusty windows and dim lights struggling to stay on. John didn't have many options. He pulled his truck into the gravel parking lot, the engine growling to a stop in the cold, silent air. The motel's lobby was unsettling. The air smelled stale, and the light inside was dim and yellowed. Behind the reception desk sat an old man with a wrinkled face and hollow, lifeless eyes. Without saying much, the old man handed John a rusted key. "Room 6, end of the hall," the man muttered with a raspy voice before turning his gaze away. John shrugged, too tired to care about the odd atmosphere. He just needed a few hours of sleep before hitting the road again. He dragged himself down the dark hallway, his footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. When he reached room 6, he unlocked the door and was greeted by a rush of icy air, as if the room had been sealed for years. The room was small and dusty. The bed, with its old, faded blanket, sat opposite a large mirror mounted on the wall. A strange chill lingered in the room, but John was too tired to think twice. He locked the door, kicked off his boots, and collapsed onto the bed. Around 2 a.m., John woke suddenly to the sound of knocking. The noise was soft but insistent, 3 steady knocks on the door. His heart pounded in his chest as he sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Who could be knocking at this hour?" he mumbled grudgingly. He staggered to the door, unlocked it, and swung it open. But there was no one there, just the dark, empty hallway. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the motel's faulty lights. John shut the door, locking it again, and returned to bed, brushing off the incident as a dream. But just as he was about to drift off, the knocking returned, this time louder and faster, almost frantic. Annoyed, John threw off the blanket and stormed to the door, yanking it open. Once again, the hallway was empty. But this time, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. Wet footprints tracked across the dusty floor, leading from his door down the hall and disappearing into the shadows. A cold sweat trickled down John's neck. He slammed the door shut, locking it tightly, and tried to shake off the growing fear. "Just my imagination," he whispered, though he didn't fully believe it. He climbed back into bed, pulling the blanket over him. But as soon as he closed his eyes, a horrible sensation swept over him. The mattress sank, as if someone had just climbed into bed beside him. John lay paralyzed, every muscle in his body frozen with fear. He could hear soft, steady breaths just behind him, as though someone was lying inches away. With his heart hammering in his chest, John slowly opened his eyes and looked toward the mirror on the wall. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the reflection, a dark figure lay next to him on the bed, its face mere inches from his own. The figure's hollow, black eyes stared at him, and a twisted, unnatural grin stretched across its face. John jerked upright, gasping for air. But when he turned to look at the bed, it was empty. No one was there. The room was eerily silent, but the cold presence remained, clinging to the air like a shadow. John didn't sleep again that night. As soon as the first light of dawn peeked through the window, he grabbed his things and hurried to the front desk to check out. The old man behind the counter greeted him with a strange smile, as if he had been expecting John. "You stayed in room 6, huh?" the old man rasped. John nodded, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. "What's with that room?" The old man's lifeless eyes seemed to glimmer for a moment, and a slow, sinister grin spread across his wrinkled face. "You're the first person to spend the night there in years," he said, his voice dripping with something that felt like malice. "The others never woke up to check out." John felt a chill run down his spine. Without another word, he bolted from the lobby and climbed into his truck. The engine roared to life, and he sped away from the cursed motel, the unsettling words of the old man echoing in his mind. As the miles passed, John began to relax, convincing himself it was all just a bad dream. But after a while, a soft knocking sound reached his ears, 3 steady taps coming from the back of the cab. His heart skipped a beat. Hands trembling, John glanced at the rearview mirror. There, sitting on the back seat, was the same dark figure from the motel, its empty eyes locked onto his. A grotesque grin spread across its face as it leaned forward, whispering in a raspy voice, "I told you. You can't leave." The child on the highway. It was late at night, and Lisa was driving along a desolate stretch of highway between California and Nevada. The sky was pitch black, with not a single star in sight. The only thing breaking the darkness was the faint glow of her headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. Hours had passed without her seeing another vehicle, and the eerie silence pressed heavily on her mind. Static from the radio filled the car, adding to the unsettling atmosphere, but she didn't dare turn it off. Silence would feel worse too suffocating. Fatigue began to creep in, and her eyes grew heavy. She kept telling herself that she would stop at the next rest area, but before she could, something strange appeared in her headlights. A figure emerged by the side of the road, a little girl. She wore a dirty white dress, clutching a ragged stuffed bear in her arms. Lisa's heart skipped a beat. She hit the brakes, tires screeching on the wet asphalt, leaving a long skid mark on the road. The car came to a stop just a few feet away from the child. Lisa quickly switched on her hazard lights and stepped out of the car, heart pounding in her chest. The night was cold, and the wind howled through the empty desert, sending shivers down her spine. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay? What are you doing out here all alone?" Lisa called out, her voice shaky with a mix of fear and concern. As she moved closer, the girl vanished, fading into the darkness as if she had never existed. Lisa froze. Her heart raced, her breath hitched in her throat. She frantically scanned the road and the surrounding desert, but there was no sign of the girl. No footprints, no sound. Nothing but an eerie, deafening silence. Trying to dismiss the encounter as a hallucination, Lisa hurried back to her car, shut the door, and locked it. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her hands trembling. "I must be tired," she whispered, starting the engine and pulling back onto the highway. A few minutes later, the air inside the car turned unnaturally cold, even though the windows were shut tight. The chills sent goosebumps down her arms, and the knot of unease in her stomach tightened. Lisa glanced into the rearview mirror, and her heart nearly stopped. The little girl was sitting in the back seat, holding her stuffed bear, her black, soulless eyes staring directly at Lisa. There was no emotion in her face, just a cold, empty stare that made Lisa's skin crawl. Lisa let out a scream and jerked the steering wheel to the side. The car swerved wildly, tires screeching on the wet road. She barely managed to regain control, avoiding the metal guardrail by inches. Panting, she glanced back at the rear seat. It was empty again. Then, a soft, chilling whisper echoed through the car. "Mama, I'm cold." The words were fragile, barely audible, but they sent a wave of terror through Lisa's body. She squeezed the steering wheel tighter, hoping to block out the sound. But the whisper persisted, growing louder and more insistent. "Mama, don't leave me." Lisa's heart pounded in her chest, and cold sweat trickled down her forehead. She kept her eyes fixed on the road, afraid to look in the mirror again. The voice felt so close, too close, as if the child was sitting right next to her, whispering directly into her ear. Unable to bear it any longer, Lisa slowly turned her head toward the passenger seat. The little girl was sitting right there, her hands clutching the stuffed bear. Her pale, twisted face smiled, a grotesque grin that stretched unnaturally wide, far beyond what a human face should allow. The child let out a faint, eerie giggle, sending a shiver down Lisa's spine. Lisa screamed and lost control of the car. Tires screeched, the vehicle spun on the slick road, and with a deafening crash, the car flipped and rolled off the highway. Metal twisted and crunched as the world around Lisa spun into chaos. And just before everything went dark, Lisa heard the child's voice again, soft and cold. "Mama, don't leave me." The next morning, rescue workers found Lisa's car overturned on the side of the highway. It was mangled and twisted, but there was no sign of Lisa or anyone else inside or near the vehicle. As the officers searched the wreckage, they found something peculiar on the passenger seat. A ragged stuffed bear sitting upright, perfectly positioned, as if someone had carefully placed it there. No one could explain what had happened, and Lisa was never found. But to this day, travelers driving along that lonely stretch of highway report seeing a little girl in a white dress standing by the side of the road, holding a tattered stuffed bear in her arms, and if anyone dares to stop, they are never seen driving away again. The dorm room companion. Amanda was starting her freshman year at a prestigious university in Pennsylvania. Like many other students, she was excited about dorm life, meeting new people, and experiencing freedom for the first time. However, things did not go as she expected. When assigned to room 302, she was informed that she would be sharing it with another student named Emily. On the first day, Amanda met Emily. She looked pale, with ghostly white skin and sunken eyes as if she hadn't slept in days. Emily didn't say much, greeting Amanda with only a nod before continuing to arrange her belongings. Everything about Emily exuded a cold and distant aura. She never left the room except for class, and whenever she returned, she would silently lie down on her bed, pulling the blanket over her entire body, ignoring Amanda completely. At first, Amanda thought Emily was just reserved and decided not to pay much attention. But as time passed, Amanda noticed strange things about her roommate. Emily always went to sleep before 9 p.m., no matter how busy she was. And the most unsettling thing was that Emily never uncovered her head while she slept, even on the hottest nights. One night, Amanda returned to the room late after a party. She entered quietly and found Emily lying under the blanket, just like usual. Amanda kicked off her shoes, too tired to turn on the lights, and climbed into bed, careful not to disturb her roommate. But in the silent darkness of the room, she felt that something was wrong. In the middle of the night, Amanda woke up suddenly. She wasn't sure why, but she felt an eerie chill and a strange sensation as if someone was watching her. Slowly opening her eyes, her heart nearly stopped. Emily was sitting upright on her bed, her pale face illuminated by the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains. Her dark, soulless eyes stared directly at Amanda, a twisted grin stretching across her face. "Emily, what are you doing?" Amanda whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Emily didn't respond. She sat motionless, her lifeless gaze locked onto Amanda. Amanda squeezed her eyes shut, hoping it was just a nightmare. But when she opened them again, Emily was gone, back under the blanket, as if she had never moved. Amanda lay frozen in place, her heart pounding, unable to sleep until morning. The next day, Amanda couldn't bear it anymore. She went to the dormitory manager, and explained the strange things happening with her roommate. But when she mentioned Emily's name, the dorm manager looked utterly confused. "Emily? There's no student named Emily assigned to room 302, the manager said, checking the list. "That room is a single. You're supposed to be staying there alone." Amanda froze. "That can't be. She's been with me since the first day." The manager frowned, his expression turning serious. "Are you sure? Because we never assigned anyone else to that room." Amanda rushed back to her room, her mind spinning with fear. When she opened the door, Emily's bed was gone along with all her belongings. There was no trace that anyone had ever shared the room with Amanda. She gasped for air, trying to stay calm, but the fear kept growing inside her. That night, Amanda decided to stay in the room to figure out what was really going on. She turned off the lights, lay still in her bed, and listened intently for any strange sounds. The room was silent, shrouded in darkness. Around midnight, she heard a faint noise, the sound of footsteps. They were soft, as if someone was carefully walking around the room. Amanda held her breath, her body stiff with fear. The footsteps stopped right beside her bed, and she could feel an icy breath against the back of her neck. Slowly, Amanda turned her head toward the sound and nearly screamed when she saw Emily standing there. Her pale face glowed faintly in the dark, her black, bottomless eyes boring into Amanda's soul. Her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "Mindy," Emily whispered hoarsely, calling out a name Amanda had never told anyone. The room grew colder than ice, and Amanda couldn't move, paralyzed with fear. Emily leaned closer, her face mere inches from Amanda's, and then the room's lights flickered off. The next morning, the dormitory manager came to check on Amanda's room. The door was still locked from the inside. But when they opened it, the room was completely empty. There was no trace of Amanda. All her belongings were gone, as if she had never lived there. Amanda's disappearance quickly became the talk of the dormitory. Other students began sharing stories about strange occurrences in room 302, footsteps in the dead of night, soft giggles from the corners, and the shadowy figure of a girl standing silently by the bed. Rumors spread that Emily was the ghost of a student who had lived there years ago and died in room 302. She never left and was always searching for a new roommate to keep with her forever. And if anyone dares to enter room 302 at midnight, they just might hear a soft whisper from the shadows. "Mindy." Nightmare aboard the Queen Mary. Anna, a 27-year-old journalist, arrives at the Queen Mary determined to investigate the ship's ghost stories. Skeptical of the supernatural, she believes the stories are exaggerated, perfect for a sensational article. But her experience aboard the ship will force her to reconsider everything she thought she knew about reality. As Anna stepped aboard the Queen Mary, the scent of aged wood and metal filled her lungs. The sun was dipping low over Long Beach Harbor, casting long shadows across the deck. With her notebook, camera, and audio recorder in hand, Anna was prepared to document the truth behind the ghost stories that had haunted this ship for decades. At check-in, the receptionist gave her a knowing smile. "Room B340. "You're brave," the woman said with a playful smirk. Anna chuckled. Brave or just curious? Despite the warning, Anna didn't feel scared. She had covered plenty of strange stories before and knew most of them boiled down to superstition. But as the night wore on, she would realize that the Queen Mary was no ordinary subject for her reporting. That first night, Anna unpacked her things in room B340, the most infamous room on the ship. As she set up her recorder to take notes, the room felt oddly quiet. No strange smells. No sudden chills. She started speaking into the recorder. Day 1. "So far, nothing unusual to report," she said, tapping her pen against her notebook. "No weird noises, no ghosts." Just as she turned off the recorder, there was a soft knock at the door. Anna frowned. She opened the door, expecting a guest or maybe staff, but there was no one there. The hallway stretched out, silent and empty. She shrugged it off. Probably just a prank, she thought, and locked the door behind her. But the moment she stepped back inside, the lights flickered. Twice. A brief power surge, maybe. She told herself it was nothing, until the blanket slid off her bed all on its own. The following morning, Anna felt restless, as if she hadn't truly slept. When she replayed her audio from the previous night, she froze. "Hello." The voice was low and raspy, definitely not hers. Her pulse quickened. Had she accidentally recorded a guest? But her room had been locked all night. As Anna prepared to leave her room, she caught a flicker of movement in the mirror on the wall. Something or someone moved behind her reflection, just out of view. She spun around, heart pounding. The room was empty. But when she looked back at the mirror, a faint smudge in the shape of a handprint lingered on the glass. Anna wiped the mirror clean, her breath shaky. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave her. Determined to uncover the truth, Anna made her way to the ship's abandoned swimming pool later that evening. The pool area was dimly lit, with cracked tiles and eerie silence filling the room. Even without water, it felt suffocating. Anna took out her camera and snapped a few pictures. As she reviewed them on her screen, her stomach dropped. In one of the photos, a young girl in an old-fashioned swimsuit stood at the bottom of the empty pool, staring directly into the camera. Anna looked up from the screen and into the pool. Nothing was there. Just as she began to step back, a sound broke the silence. Laughter, high-pitched, playful, and far too close. It echoed across the room, circling her like invisible hands tugging at her nerves. She backed away, clutching her camera. The laughter grew louder, filling the space around her. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Anna's curiosity pushed her deeper into the ship, down toward the engine room, another notorious hotspot for ghostly encounters. The further she ventured, the colder the air became, as if she were stepping into another world entirely. The hum of the ship's old machinery echoed through the tight corridors, and somewhere in the distance, footsteps followed her. Anna stopped and turned around, expecting to see another guest or crew member. But the corridor behind her was empty. She pressed forward, gripping her recorder tightly. As she reached the heart of the engine room, Anna noticed a figure standing near the pipes. It was a man in a worn, grease-stained uniform, his back turned to her. "Hello?" Anna called out, her voice shaky. The man didn't move. She approached cautiously, but the moment she reached out to touch his shoulder, the figure dissolved into thin air. The room fell into an eerie stillness. Then, without warning, the sound of metal clanging echoed loudly, as if something unseen was trying to get her attention. By the time Anna returned to her room, her nerves were frayed. She wanted to pack up and leave, but something inside her felt unfinished, like the story wasn't ready to let her go. As she reached for the door to leave room B340, the handle wouldn't budge. It was as if the door had locked itself from the inside. Panic rose in her chest. She twisted the handle harder, but it wouldn't give. In the mirror across the room, Anna noticed a shadowy figure standing behind her reflection, a faint grin curling across its face. "You're not leaving," the voice whispered in her ear, though no one was behind her. Anna grabbed her phone and dialed the front desk, but the line went dead after a single ring. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness. Desperation gripped Anna as she pounded on the door, trying to break it open. The mirror across the room began to shimmer, and her reflection twisted into something unrecognizable, a warped version of herself, grinning with an eerie, lifeless expression. The shadowy figure in the mirror leaned closer, whispering, "You belong here now." Anna screamed, kicking the door with all her strength. Just as she thought she would be trapped forever, the door swung open on its own, and Anna stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. But as she ran through the hall, she realized something horrifying. The ship's layout had changed. Corridors that should have led to the exit now looped back on themselves. Every turn led her deeper into the labyrinth of the ship, as if it were deliberately keeping her inside. Finally, Anna burst onto the deck, gasping for fresh air. The cool night breeze hit her face, and she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She sprinted toward the gangway, her heart pounding in her chest. But just as she reached the end of the ramp, a cold hand clamped down on her shoulder. Anna froze, too terrified to turn around. A familiar voice whispered, "You'll come back." "They always do." Anna spun around, but there was no one there. She fled down the gangway and off the ship, her legs trembling beneath her. As she reached the safety of the parking lot, she glanced back at the Queen Mary. The ship loomed silently in the distance, its windows dark and empty, yet Anna could still feel the eyes watching her. Anna never published her article about the Queen Mary. She refused to speak about what happened that night, insisting that some stories are better left untold. But her friends noticed the change in her, how she avoided mirrors, how she never mentioned the trip again, and how she always looked over her shoulder, as if expecting someone or something to be there. And every so often, late at night, she would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced she could still hear the soft knock at her door. Some doors are better left unopened, and some ships will never let you leave completely. Whaley House. The Whaley House sits on a quiet hill in San Diego, but its tranquility is only apparent. With a history spanning centuries, the house is not only an architectural icon, but also the site of many mysterious and unexplained events. Whaley House was built in the mid-19th century by Thomas Whaley, a wealthy businessman. However, from the moment it was completed, it was associated with strange events. The house was built on the site of an old execution ground where many people had faced dark fates. One of them was Yankee Jim Robinson, a man who was tried here. Locals believe that his spirit never left, but still wanders around the house. Later, when the Whaley House became the residence of the Thomas family, supernatural phenomena began to appear. Lights would turn on and off by themselves. Doors would open and close by themselves, and footsteps would be heard every night on the old wooden floors, even though no one was in the room. One day, Megan, a young woman with a passion for photography, decided to visit the Whaley House to take photos for a personal project. She walked through the heavy wooden gate and felt a cold wind blowing through, despite the clear blue sky and no wind that day. As soon as she entered the main hall, Megan felt an invisible gaze following her. The ancient portraits hanging on the walls seemed to be watching her every move. Trying to ignore the uneasiness, she pulled out her camera and took a few pictures. But when she reviewed them, Megan was stunned. The pictures showed a strange figure, a tall man in shabby clothes, standing right behind her in the hall. She turned around. The room was empty, but the floor where she stood creaked as if someone had walked in front of her. Megan continued up the wooden stairs that led to the upper floor, where the Whaleys had once slept. The steps creaked under her every step, but a second set of footsteps sounded behind her, even though no one was following her. Halfway up the stairs, she stopped and listened. Then, from the space around her, she heard a faint whisper like a warning. "Don't go up." Megan's heart was pounding, but she calmed herself. "It's just my imagination," she told herself. She continued up the stairs, but this time, a chill ran down her spine as if someone had just blown cold air on her neck. When Megan entered the second-floor bedroom, she saw a large bed covered in a white lace blanket. The room seemed to still hold the scent of the people who had lived there. She began taking pictures, but a growing sense of unease grew within her. Then suddenly, a slight depression appeared in the mattress, as if someone invisible had sat down on the bed. Megan froze, not daring to breathe. She backed away slowly, but the blanket suddenly curled back on itself, as if someone were pulling it toward them. Terrified, Megan decided to leave the room. But as she turned back to the stairs, a woman in a white dress appeared at the top of the stairs. Her face was pale, her eyes were lifeless, and her smile was sinister. She stood there, blocking Megan's way down, making her feel like she was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Megan closed her eyes, praying that when she opened them, the figure would be gone. But when she opened them, the woman was standing right in front of her, just a few feet away. Megan's breath caught in her chest. The figure whispered, "It's time." Without thinking, Megan ran down the stairs. Doors in the house opened and slammed shut with each step, as if the house were trying to trap her. She dashed across the main hall and flung open the door. Daylight poured down on her, making the terror seem to melt away. When Megan took one last look back at the house, she saw the woman in the white dress standing at the second-floor window, still staring down at her, an eerie smile on her face. Megan never told anyone about her experience at the Whaley House. She deleted the eerie photos from that day as soon as she got home. But the memory of the woman in the white dress and the whispers on the stairs haunted her every night. Sometimes in her dreams, she would find herself lost in the dark hallways of the Whaley House, hearing footsteps following her. And when she turned around, the woman with the dead eyes would be there, smiling and whispering, "You will return." The Whaley House was still open to visitors, but those who had entered knew not everyone escaped completely. If you find my story interesting, please like and subscribe to wait for our better stories every day.